The Murderous Narcissist and His Lieutenants. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. In the main, narcissists do not tend to kill. The vast majority will not engage in such behavior. Principally, this is driven by the fact that the narcissist prefers to keep their appliances alive because they're of greater use. Naturally, it's not born out of having emotional empathy for the relevant individual or appliance, but out of their usefulness to the narcissist. But there are some instances where the narcissist might kill. Commonly, it is as a consequence of a loss of control, the manifestation of heated ignited fury following a threat to control, either as a consequence of challenge fuel or as a consequence of wounding. The narcissism ignites heated fury with the consequence that the narcissist lashes out and may not have intended to kill, but as a consequence of the application of force, murders the victim. In some instances, the narcissist might be driven to take steps to plan the demise of an individual, and it is not so much as linked to heated ignited fury, but as the necessity of the nullification of the threat to control, and the narcissism ultimately determines that the most effective way to do that is to disincentivize them by executing, killing them. This scenario is one whereby the narcissism does not deem that the assets associated with the victim are worth preserving, or that they are overshadowed by the immense threat to control posed by the particular individual, with the consequence that the only appropriate option available is to assert control over them directly by killing them. In some instances, the narcissist will bring about the demise of an individual not so much as linked to the individual and what they pose, but the consequential effect. So, for instance, as I have mentioned in separate work concerning Lucy Letby, there was the suggestion that part of why she did as she did was so that she could be seen to be the saviour of the children, that she could create a drama which you could then benefit from by way of responding to it, thus bringing people under control and drawing fuel. In effect, both fire starter and firefighter. And therefore, the demise of the individuals there is not so much as linked to them being a threat to control. After all, babies are not going to pose any significant threat to control given what they are, but rather their usefulness as a device to triangulate with other people by harming them and, in some instances, murdering them. Accordingly, whilst the vast majority of narcissists do not kill, there are some that will do so. And we have an instance here that demonstrates the murderous nature of a particular narcissist, but also demonstrates the way in which a narcissist who commits a crime is able to pull the wool over the eyes of certain individuals by virtue of the fact of them being lieutenants. As I have explained elsewhere, narcissists have a coterie. These are people that are supporters of the narcissist, often family or friends, colleagues, who have been manipulated into being supporters of the narcissist by virtue of a variety of potential ties between them and the narcissist. Lieutenants are a step up from the coterie. These are individuals which show a slavish devotion to the needs and necessities of the narcissist, invariably often instructed to carry out acts on behalf of the narcissist by virtue of the use of threat, inducement, or in some instances because they simply share the same mindset. Sometimes the lieutenant of the narcissist is a narcissist themselves, but not necessarily so. They could even be an empath who has excessive emotional thinking which overrides the application of logic, so that their desire to please, to cater to the narcissist is such that they engage in doing things for that particular narcissist. And here we see an example of the existence not only of lieutenants, but also exhibiting certain behaviours which demonstrate that slavish devotion to the narcissist. In the tight-knit equestrian community circles in which they mixed, Jill Robinson and her friends worked hard and played hard. We were wild enough, all right, she recalls. A lot of it can be like a Jilly Cooper novel. We worked together, hung out together, living the horsey dream. Among those living that dream were a clutch of young women, Christina and Katie Simpson, horse-mad sisters from the village of Tynan in Northern Ireland, groomer Hayley Robb, and a teenage British equestrian star called Rose de Montmorency Wright. Then there was Christina's partner, Jonathan Creswell, a charismatic 36-year-old jockey turned trainer who walked through the local stable yard in Derry with all the swagger of a celebrity. Grandiosity, sense of entitlement. Creswell charmed everyone he met, use of charm for the purpose of assertion of control, and if anybody suspected that his wide smile and knowing strut masked a profoundly sinister side, then they said nothing. Indeed, to many, Creswell was a hero, especially when they learned that on August the 3rd, 2020, he had tried frantically to save the life of Katie Simpson, the 21-year-old younger sister of his partner Christina, after finding Katie hanging from a banister. As a weeping Creswell told police, he had managed to cut her down and administer CPR. However, Katie, a bubbly, fearless and talented show jumper, had not taken her own life. In fact, she had been raped, beaten and killed by Creswell in a jealous rage. In effect, this narcissist engages in the application of the direct assertion of control by way of rape, physical assault, and then murder. He then concocts a story to make it seem like she tried to kill herself and he sought to save her, not only revising history and engaging in lying, but doing so in a manner to make himself look good. It would take months before police properly investigated, and finally, in March 2021, Creswell was arrested and charged with her rape and murder. But this was not the only startling development in this deeply troubling case. In actual fact, more information arose when the full story was laid bare last year. For it swiftly emerged that Creswell was not only engaged in multiple sexual relationships with other women, including Katie, who he killed herself, but 3 women had lied to try to cover up for him. Thus, this narcissist was engaged in multiple sexual relationships despite supposedly being in a solid relationship with one individual. This individual, having multiple sexual relationships, demonstrates an ability to control a number of people through the application of sex, a sense of entitlement to ongoing multiple sexual partners, a lack of emotional empathy for the intimate partner primary source by repeatedly cheating with other individuals, a lack of emotional empathy for the intimate partner secondary sources that he was cheating with and in relation to with other people. Thus, having created this web of multiple intimate partner secondary sources alongside his intimate partner primary source, this showed a lack of accountability, various manipulative behaviours, a sense of entitlement, a lack of boundary recognition, and an absence of emotional empathy. There's also the issue that he'd managed to get 3 women to lie to cover up for him. One of them, Rose de Montmorency Wright, had lived with Katie, Creswell and Christina, and actually had helped carry Katie's coffin at her funeral. The others were Jill Robinson and Hayley Robb, those friends of Katie's who'd lived out their horsey dream by her side. Accordingly, this narcissist was not only able to keep those plates spinning with regard to multiple sexual relationships, but he was also able to ensure that 3 individuals who were actually friends of the deceased, of the murdered woman, lied on his behalf. They were lieutenants of his. All 3 women later pleaded guilty to offences ranging from perverting the course of justice to withholding information, and they received suspended prison sentences. The consequence of their actions is such that they ended up with criminal convictions, and yet the seriousness of the action that they engaged in, withholding information, perverting the course of justice, was engaged in because of the thrall that they were held in relation to Creswell and the manipulations that he asserted over them. As it was, Creswell never actually faced justice, because at 9 a.m. on April the 24th, 2024, one day after the prosecution had outlined their case at his trial, his body was found at his home. In that, of course, he has sought to nullify the threat to control posed by the potential for his conviction by suicide, the ultimate act of withdrawal by the narcissist. I've spoken in separate videos about the nature of the relationship between the narcissist and suicide, and I'd encourage you to watch those videos to learn more. Among those speaking for the first time is 43-year-old Jill Robinson, who disclosed her ongoing friendship with Creswell and remorse over her decision to take his bloodied clothes to a laundrette in the wake of Katie's murder. Every day I ask myself, why did I do that? Why did I wash them? A lot of people don't understand the way that he was, that you didn't question anything. You blame yourself so much. The self-flagellation of the victim of the narcissist. How you got yourself involved in something that led to such catastrophic results. Creswell was described as a handsome, talented young jockey, 6 years her junior, and was Robinson's first love. It was an all-consuming passion, undoubtedly as a consequence of the love bombing that he was engaged in. Nevertheless, his phone quickly started ringing with other girls at the end of the line. Commission of infidelity, sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy. The first time I thought he was with someone else, it was like complete devastation, like someone had taken out your heart and crushed it like an Easter egg. But he talked his way out of it, she says. Just as he did about the slaps, punches, and hair-pulling, all forms of physical abuse, direct assertion of control, that he routinely inflicted on her. But that was nothing compared to the mental cruelty he was capable of. Creswell had a way to make you feel that small, completely destroy your self-confidence, Robinson recalls. Belittlement, invalidation, more devaluing behaviours. Their relationship ended in 2008, when she went to Australia. Within a couple of months, Creswell got together with a 23-year-old named Abby Lyle after meeting her at an equestrian event in Belfast. Notice the speed at which, with one intimate partner primary source escaping him, he hunts down another. She was a successful Olympian who competed for Ireland in Paris last year. Abby, now 40, spoke for the first time in a documentary about these affairs, about the devastating violence that was inflicted on her by Creswell during their 9-month relationship. She wept as she recalled being taken to Woodland, where Creswell kicked her, punched her, and strangled her. Direct assertion of control, physical devaluation, threatening, use of threat, to dump her body as she sought to stay alive, aware of the devastating grief that would engulf her parents, who had lost her brother 3 years earlier. I was thinking, don't let him kill you, because your parents have already lost a child and they can't lose another, she sobs. Like so many domestic violence victims, Abby blamed herself for Creswell's rages, heat-ignited fury, and initially refused to cooperate with Nuala Lapin, a police officer her desperately worried father sent to her doorstep. Only when Creswell threatened, use of threat, to dump her in a bath of bleach, which could end her riding career, did Abby pluck up the courage to leave. There was one thing I would always want more than him, and that was horses, she recalls. She escaped and used a payphone to call Nuala for help. Creswell was subsequently charged with a series of offences, among them false imprisonment, kidnapping and threats to kill, all of which he denied. Denial, the first line of the twin lines of the narcissistic defence. Johnny's version of events was that he was Abby's saviour, that she was mentally unstable, smearing, crazed, and that she would sit in the car and punch herself in the face, says Nuala, recalling how he also tried to flirt with her and another female officer as they questioned him. Lack of boundary recognition, sense of grandiosity. Finally, Creswell pleaded guilty to common assault and ABH and was jailed for 6 months. But he emerged to a hero's welcome, greeted by a party attended by 30 friends, most of whom believed that Abby had made up her story to try to get compensation. Smearing. Basically, he just picked up where he left off, says Abby. Indeed, he did. with Creswell quickly embarking on a relationship with Christina Simpson, one of 6 siblings from Tynan, with whom he went on to have 2 children. What no one knew is that he was simultaneously grooming her younger sister, Katie, who was just 9 when she first met him. He controlled and coerced Katie since she was a child. Detective Sergeant James Brannigan, the officer instrumental in bringing Creswell to justice, told a court hearing. No one knows when his relationship with Katie became sexual, although some locals noticed that the bubbly young horsewoman seemed terrified of Creswell hearing suggestions that she might get a boyfriend. Don't go saying anything like that in front of Johnny, a family friend Chris Falloon recalls Katie pleading with him after he suggested another show jumper might be keen on her. Nonetheless, a few weeks before she died, Katie had embarked on a relationship with a show jumper called Shane McCluskey, who is not named in the documentary but was identified by the Daily Mail last year. The extent of her fear of Creswell was exposed in a frantic exchange of messages with McCluskey, in which she begged him to lie about the fact they had spent the previous night together if Creswell got in touch. "He'll kill me," she wrote. It proved a tragic premonition, as 24 hours later, an outwardly devastated Creswell rang the ambulance service to say he had returned from dropping off his children at his mother's house to find Katie hanging from the banister of the family home. He insisted on attempting to take her directly to Altnagavlin Hospital in his car to avoid paramedics visiting the house. He played the devastated brother-in-law to perfection, shell-shocked and weeping at Katie's bedside. Facade, pity play. No one was more distraught, recalls Robinson. Not everyone was convinced by Creswell's story, however. Some nurses raised concerns over bruises on Katie's body. Her injuries were shocking, says D.S. Brannigan. Her hands were like boxing gloves. They were that swollen and bruised. There were marks on her legs, on her inner thigh. There was a massive bruise on her shoulder, a small cut to her lip, and bruises on her arms. Katie's friends, Jill and Haley, claimed she'd fallen from a horse the day before, but Brannigan was not convinced. Indeed, Katie had not fallen. This story had been put about by Creswell in a bid to cover his tracks. Revision of history. Nonetheless, when Katie died 6 days later, having never recovered consciousness, the narrative that she had taken her own life had been set in stone. Certainly, local police seemed uninterested in investigating. Tanya Foles, a journalist who knew Katie and had suspicions that all was not right, recalls a Derry police officer accusing her of being a curtain twitcher when she rang to alert them to Creswell's previous convictions for violence. D.S. Brannigan, who worked in County Armagh, but had been contacted by Foles to see if he could help, recalls how he was similarly stonewalled, with Derry detectives telling him Katie had tried to take her own life twice. As he later discovered, they had mistakenly logged 2 suicide attempts, the first when she arrived in hospital and the second when she died from her injuries. It would take 6 months of dogged work by Brannigan and Tanya Foles for Derry police to finally open an investigation. When previously unexamined internal swabs taken during the post-mortem came back, showing Creswell's semen, detectives had enough to arrest him. Even then, Creswell tried to bluster his way out of it, announcing he'd been in a relationship with Katie since she was 17, and that they'd had sex several times the night before she'd gone to hospital. His arrogance would also be his undoing. Later in the interview, he drew a diagram showing how he'd found Katie. He said he was kissing the wood. He said she was kissing the wood, meaning her face was facing the inside banister, Brannigan recalls. Yet when the detective revisited the scene, he discovered that the strap with which Katie had purportedly hung herself was not long enough to do this. It was a eureka moment, says Brannigan. We could see Katie did not die the way that Creswell suggested. Creswell was charged with Katie's murder, the first of what would prove to be several criminal charges in relation to her death. In the weeks that followed, astonished detectives uncovered CCTV footage showing Haley Robb following Creswell's car home from hospital, before entering his home, then leaving with a bag and placing it in the boot of her own vehicle. She subsequently admitted that as Katie lay dying, she and Robinson had taken Creswell's clothes to a laundrette. Robb had also cleaned up traces of blood in the house. Rose de Montmorency Wright, who had platonically shared a double bed with Katie for a while, was subsequently arrested in England and brought back to Northern Ireland for questioning. Brannigan says, she admitted to us, yeah, he told me he'd beaten Katie, and I said, why didn't you tell us? She said she believed Katie had taken her own life and didn't believe it was relevant. I pushed her on it, but she asked to speak to a solicitor, and when she came back, she wouldn't say anything. She subsequently pleaded guilty to withholding information and received an 8-month prison sentence suspended for 2 years. Robinson received a 16-month suspended sentence for perverting the course of justice, and Rob 2 years, suspended for 2 years, for withholding information and perverting the course of justice. Katie's sister Christina, whom police also believed was subjected to coercive control by Creswell, was not prosecuted. Loyal to the end, one of his lieutenants, Jill Robinson, who visited Creswell in prison when he was on remand, confides that she felt she had let Johnny down by telling the truth. It subsequently emerged that he was facing a catalogue of allegations from more than a dozen other women, among them a teenage girl who had spoken to police about being abused by Creswell. What will never be revealed is why, as Abby Lyle puts it, Creswell had such a deep-seated hatred for women. Where it came from, I don't know, and I don't want to know, she says, but we were all bad, we were all whores, we were all the same, but in the end he was more scared of us than we were of him. An interesting example of a narcissist who was moved as a consequence of a direct threat to control and his loss of control through heated ignited fury to murder an intimate partner secondary source, to then seek to cover it up, and then enlist the assistance of various lieutenants, all of whom were having sexual relationships with him. There is a multitude of aspects of this man's narcissism, demonstrating his sense of entitlement to behave in the way that he did, the complete absence of emotional empathy with regard to the way that he treated and abused people, his lack of accountability for his behaviours, his grandiosity, his haughty behaviours, the various manipulations that he's exhibited, and aspects of the narcissistic dynamic. But it is also interesting to demonstrate how the lieutenants, who were intimate partner secondary sources in his fuel matrix, continued to act on his behalf to try and cover matters up, which resulted in collateral consequences for them. An interesting example of the murderous narcissist, what drove him to murder, and also the lieutenants who he also asserted control over. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.